Over the next 3 days, Candida rode into the surrounding villages of Gurez and the Tulel Valley. At 8,000 feet above sea level, one could only travel there when the weather permitted, which was 5 months in the year. For the rest of the time, Gurez and its neighboring villages would be buried under 20 feet of snow, lost to the world. The people she met were wary at first. Their homes were within sight of the line of control that separated the Indian from Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Militancy, firing, and unrest were not unfamiliar to them. However, Candida found that if she kept her manner unobtrusive and friendly, they responded warmly enough. The Dards, the tribe that populated this region, were by nature hospitable. But Candida was amused to find that without exception, every time she arrived at a village, the people reacted with astonishment. A young woman in trousers riding on a bike, a motorbike, alone, in Gurez? Unbelievable. In every village she entered, the locals surrounded her instantly, the young men to gawk at the Royal Enfield, the elderly to gawk at Candida, and the children to yell joyfully, cut capers around the two, and shake hands. In Chakwali, an old man was sitting on some steps nearby, watching her. Candida looked up and caught his eyes. She raised her palm to her forehead in salam, and he returned the greeting. She went across to sit down beside him, while the children of the village crawled all over the Royal Enfield, making themselves at home on it. With one eye on them and the other on her companion, she introduced herself. To her joy, she found that the old man spoke Urdu, which she could understand. I am Jamal Mir. I am 100 years old, he said matter-of-factly. Candida was startled. He did look ancient, it was true, but 100? When were you born, Chacha? She asked. When the snow was falling outside and our homes were buried under it, my mother told me. She smiled at the simple description of a birthday. She remembered the birthday parties her mother had thrown for her when she was a child. But Jamal Mir was speaking again and she turned her attention back to him. He looked like he had a story to tell, and Candida did not want to miss a word of it. They would come and go all the time. It was a busy place, full of bustle and importance, because everybody had to pass through Chakwali if they wanted to go across to Gilgit and Baltistan. He smiled proudly and then he added, they would carry potatoes with them. Candida frowned, not understanding his meaning. Potatoes? To eat on the journey? They would bring back apples in exchange, he added. Oh, trade, thought Candida, catching on. True, Gurez had been the gateway to Central Asia on the ancient Silk Route. Candida remembered studying about that in the 7th grade. Jamal Mir had probably never heard the term Silk Route. He was merely describing the experience of living on it. A tall, middle-aged fellow approached and greeted the old man. Teje Khalheng, he inquired in Shina, the language of the Dardik people. I am well, replied Jamal Mir, nodding, and the man walked on while Jamal continued with his story. They came in caravan or on horses. A few even came on foot. They always stopped here to rest. They stayed with us, sometimes strangers, sometimes friends. The traders were your friends, Chacha? Asked Candida. They became our friends in time, he replied, after 3 or 4 trips. They told us stories from over there. And he pointed towards the mountains in the northwest. They told us stories about the people they exchanged things with, about their homes, their children. His voice trailed off, his eyes gazing into a past that he could not follow. Friends, he murmured softly to himself sadly. The children were sitting on the bike seat now, pretending to rev the engine. They made loud sounds to imitate the roar of a speeding bike and then fell about laughing at their own genius. After watching them in amusement, Candida turned her attention back to the old man, for he had resumed speaking. After 1947, people stopped coming here. No more potatoes and apples. No more friends. Everybody has forgotten us now. As Candida looked about her, she realized that Gurez was indeed a lonely place. Perhaps one of the loneliest places in the world. Maybe that was why the hearts of its people were still simple, their traditions untouched, their culture untainted by outside influences. Each village was like an isolated island. They cultivated potatoes along the fertile banks of the Kishanganga and tended to their livestock. As she watched, a group of women came down the slope carrying baskets on their hands piled high with logs of wood that they had been cutting and gathering. Candida stared, open-mouthed, at how effortlessly they bore their burden. One young woman walking past murmured, "Salam alaikum." "Walaikum assalam, Aida. Mas waipio raktamus?" Jamal Mir said to her in Shina. She nodded her assent. Then, remembering his guest, he called out hurriedly, "Do!" She gave a half smile and kept walking. "My great-grandson's wife," he said to Candida, switching back to Urdu again. "I have asked her for 2 glasses of water for us." Candida watched Ida offload the basket of logs onto the wood pile outside their home. "Those logs must weigh at least 40 kilos, mused Candida, truly impressed by the strength in the woman's deceptively frail body. Seeing the direction of her gaze, the old man explained, 5 months in the year we are buried under snow. 20, sometimes 30 feet high the snow comes. We must stay inside our homes and sit around the Bukhari to keep warm. In the summer months, our women collect wood for the Bukhari and stock up in preparation for the following winter." "How much wood is needed, Chacha?" "About 50 or 60 kilos a day," he replied. Candida's jaw dropped open. Aida came out bearing 2 glasses of water. She smiled gently at her guest and gestured invitingly into the house. The old man led the way inside, where the women folk of his family were brewing noon chai. Candida joined them on the floor, sitting cross-legged and looking around her. The house was made entirely of log woods, piled one on top of the other, with not a nut or a bolt to hold them in place. In fact, every house in Chakwali and the surrounding villages was fashioned in the same way. "It keeps the snow out and the heat in," explained Jamal Mir, sipping his tea. "It can withstand even the earthquakes that happen here from time to time," he chuckled. He gestured for Candida to begin, and she raised her cup to her lips. The tea was pink and salty. The women handed around buttered lavas, which was to be dipped in the brew and consumed. The combination was delicious, and the piping hot tea warmed her immediately. When the tea was finished, Candida thanked the women and stepped outside the log house, while Jamal stayed behind to discuss the weaving that his women folk were to begin. The front door was built high above the ground, probably to hold out against snow piling up and blocking it too early in the winter. A roughly hewn wooden ramp served to convey people from the house down to the street below. Halfway along the ramp, Candida stopped and looked out towards the west, where Pakistan lay. Chakwali was, in fact, the last village on the Indian side of the line of control. Civilians were not allowed beyond this point. "At night, we often hear artillery firing," said Jamal quietly. He had come to stand behind her while she had been lost in reverie. I wonder if my brother is still alive over there. He jerked his head towards the west. Your brother lives in Pakistan? Asked Candida. In 1947, he went as usual to trade with the people there, while my parents and sister and I remained behind at home. Suddenly, a line was drawn. This side became India, that side became Pakistan. We could no longer freely travel from one side to the other like we used to. We never saw my brother again. Anyway, it is better if he is dead. What is the use of living for so long? No use. I should know. And the old man laughed heartily at himself. Candida watched his merriment with a sense of wonder. These people had so little that they sometimes had to melt snow to drink in the absence of water during the winter months. There was no television, no amenities, no links to the outside world or even to the rest of the country to which they were supposed to belong. The nearest school was 14 kilometers away, and the children had to trudge there on foot. Snowfall, shelling, and infiltration ensured that their attendance was sporadic at best. And yet, this old man, who had seen this life for 100 years or close to it, could still find a reason to laugh. As she bid goodbye to her friend, Candida took out as much money as she could spare and pressed it into his hands. He started to protest vociferously, but then he saw that she was crying. Averting his eyes quickly, he said no more. As Candida rode away from Chakwali, she stopped and turned to get a last glimpse of what she was leaving behind. People were bustling about their work. A herd of goats scrambled up a slope, shepherded on by a man with a stick. Snow-covered peaks stood like sentinels in the background, grimly watching over a people that the rest of the world had forgotten. She saw a valley, green and lush, and a river running through it. She turned around and rode away. Perhaps she might never return to this place, but at 24, never is too long a time to know. There would be times in Bangalore, as Candida sat behind her desk at work computing numbers, when she would remember that somewhere in the world stood a range of mountains. And then her spirit would rise up and rush away to rejoin them, to dance in their laps and wander in their midst, free. Candida had left her fish in the Unkal lake and her tears in Chandratal. Her heart she left behind her in Gurez.